We are not in a war between Iran, Israel, and America. We are in a war between the military industrial complex and the financial industrial complex. There's no such thing as America first because Trump works for his lobby. I think this is the global reset. I think it's a managed transition. When you follow the money, that's what it's saying. I expect that that's going to change the world in April.
All right, Simon, thank you so much for joining me again. I appreciate you coming on last minute. I wanted to get your view, your take on what's going on currently with the Iran conflict. Because honestly, for me, it's been kind of all over the map. There feels like there's a ton of fog here. Like even just looking back in March of 2025, Tulsi Gabbard came out and said they weren't developing nukes. And then in June, we destroyed the nukes. And now we're back because of nukes. And the Strait of Hormuz is open, but it's closed. And it's nearly complete, but it's going to take into September. So 30,000 foot view, what are you seeing? What is going on from your perspective? How does this fit into your theory that we're transitioning to a multipolar world? And then more importantly as well, who stands to benefit from the US war with Iran, right? Like where does the money lead us?
Okay. Yeah, we'll take all of those questions individually then. And that will take us the whole episode. So it's great to be back. I seem to always come back when we have these big geopolitical events. I think the last one we did was Venezuela.
Yep.
And then we've done a. This is definitely the big one.
Yep.
So there's obviously we've talked about this proof of weapons network. You have a financial industrial complex that profits from financing wars and then rebuilding. You have a military industrial complex that profits from both war and defense. And then you have a technical industrial complex, which is currently using algorithms as like a new media and new data play in order to, build out our police and surveillance state. And I call that a proof of weapons network in previous episodes because Bitcoin proof of work is the resistance against it. So when you take that framework, you can really get out of the fog, the cloudy fog of information and just really stand back and look at this saying who benefits from this war. And so we can really answer that question. So firstly, you talked about we've got this big geopolitical transition that I've been talking about for years that other people believe is happening, which is this transition to a multipolar world. You know, you have an America, the previous empire, which was really a continuation of the British Empire. And now the British Empire and this Anglo-Saxon Empire, as it were, was subordinate to this private financial and global capital. And so over the years, through financialization and securitization, the West has been fully captured. It is subordinate to banks. And through the public markets, banks are able to, or this financial industrial complex, to be more accurate, is able to control the military industrial complex, which underneath it has the concept of a deep state with MI6, Mossad, the colonies, Five Eyes, this type of stuff. And then you have a rising new control grid in the technical industrial complex. And so the concept of a multipolar world is that it used to be that you could use the military in order to gain access to all the resources that you need to subordinate a country so that it would print its own money once you've installed a Western central bank. And it could use that money in order to take over all the resources, regime change a country, install a corrupt leader, and then make sure that those resources come back to prop up the dollar. And that all that money is lent to the US government through the treasury markets. And so whatever happens at the Federal Reserve level, like if you get some inflation in America, you get it 10 times worse in these countries that are subordinate to the dollar. And so you have the IMF that goes out there to try and enforce these things. Now, this has been done throughout the multi-decades US empire. But we had this trend where, again, I always try to bring it financial and then we'll get right into the geopolitical and the current. You have this trend where effectively this global financial industrial complex would use financialization, securitization, and now tokenization in order to make all corporate interests subordinate to it, as well as use lobbies in order to control the government, and then use blackmail rings in order to control power, judicial, and various other things. Um, Now, what did it want to do when it came off the gold standard in 71, which was a debt default after the Vietnam War? So once it could no longer default, once it could no longer pay, we entered into this fiat currency standard where it was just effectively rolling over a Ponzi scheme, and you didn't need to back it by debt. You just needed to back it by the ability to sell US treasuries, and the financial industrial complex used those US treasuries as collateral to get as many resources as it possibly could. Now, at some stage, you completely hollow out the manufacturing base, which is what happened to America. You had globalization, you had the World Trade Organization, it would bring China into the fold. And in China, through its vast population and currency suppression, was able to build the strongest military base in the world. Think about the British Empire. When there was a Dutch Empire, it was built upon naval ships. The British Empire were able to, they were the cheap labor at the time, and then they copied the technology and built their own naval fleet. And then at the end of that, the Bank of England bankrupted the country. We had World War One, World War Two, and America had the manufacturing base that built the military industrial complex. And eventually it was co opted by the financial industrial complex. Now the military industrial complex is being disrupted by technology and the technical industrial complex. Now, what happened in Iran, for example, is they built a new military based upon drones, based upon cybersecurity, based upon artificial intelligence, based upon military, as did Israel. While America was kind of these big naval ships and legacy type of finance, and it now turns out that you could take a ginormous bomb that costs millions and billions to produce at scale, and a $50,000 drone is able to just come and take out these ships, take out these missiles. And so we've had this massive technology change. But who was building it all? Well, everyone was using China. And so China had the cheap labor, China had the manufacturing base, China had all of the rare earth minerals and components that are needed, China had all the commodities, and it became the only country that had all the parts of the equation. So China slowly started to kind of reverse this IMF financial colonization. And China built a manufacturing base and built a Belt and Road Initiative, started building up Africa, started building up the Middle East, started building up different parts of Asia, built relationships, didn't regime change them, didn't take over, didn't install like their puppet leaders, allowed them to have their ideology and allowed them to use some of their resources as well. So China was able to exert more and more influence. America's share of GDP shrunk from 60% to now 25%. And now what happened, because you had this global network of the financial industrial complex that effectively controls the corporate interest, all of the people are in debt, controls the government through bondholders, controls the capital markets through, and controls the media, you're able to just effectively turn America and rent the military industrial complex almost like a rent militia to go get you resources. And so, with that, the growth opportunities of these financial industrial complex starts looking for foreign opportunities. And so they start pushing capital into other countries. They start, through globalization, take advantage of China's cheap manufacturing base. And effectively, their GDP keeps going up. The currency of America keeps getting stronger and stronger and stronger because everyone's lending it back to the US government. But it's just taking out the manufacturing base until like the 70% of the economy is service based, and most of it is financialization. So it turns into full, pure speculation, currency speculation, and that's kind of where we are. At that stage, you hit a debt crisis, end of empire, and that's kind of where America is, just rolling over its debt. Now, once you hit what we call the fiscal dominant stage. This is the economic and background to then we can understand these wars. You hit a stage where you need to print as much money as possible and spend it back into the stock market. So here's what happens: is you burden the American people with all of the debt. The financial institutions receive all the interest, but now it starts to become, problematic in terms of your ability to roll over the debt. So when you get the government to come up with more and more reasons to print money and spend it back into the stock market, and the easiest way to do that is via the military industrial complex. So you get Trump to increase his budget from a trillion to a trillion and a half. That goes pumped into military. Military are then able to go and get as many resources as they can. You get as many resources as you can, and you use that in stock value. And effectively, this wealth inequality and K shaped economy just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And whoever owns the assets ends up with everything. Everyone else ends up with all the debt. And then you try and devalue the debt. And so you devalue the debt by printing more and more money. That then creates more inflation at the end of the cycle. And the sacrifice you need to make is the world reserve currency. So that's what Britain did in World War One, came off the gold standard, various other things. So now you've got this whole macro side. The currency starts weakening, and then that pushes all of that capital that was investing in the strongest currency, lending to the US government. Um, that unwinds all of these trades: euro dollar, petro dollar, Japan carry trade, all the countries that pegged their currency to the dollar. They start having to sell their treasuries. And they're like, well, what do we buy now? We don't want to buy our own currency. We can print our own currency. So they buy gold. And then you have this commodity market squeeze. But this financial industrial complex is not nationalistic, it's global in nature. And so what it does is it co-opted all of the countries that effectively maintained their own resources. And some of those countries are countries that have an independent central bank or a sovereign wealth fund, or countries that nationalize their resources, oil and energy resources. And so if you look around the world, the countries that did that the best in Europe was Norway. So you have the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. You had China that has this ginormous surpluses. You have Japan that has massive debt, but massive surpluses as well. And then you have the countries that have all the energy and were effectively the Gulf countries. So you have the Qatari Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, the UAE Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Kuwait Sovereign Wealth Fund. All of this, which we can call transnational capital, partnered with the Western financial industrial complex, and they're able to set the order. They're able to manage capital flows. They're managed to rent the US military, the most powerful military in the world. And they're able to effectively manage these capital flows. And now it wants that, because the returns in America are not what they were, it's resetting the world order. But at the same time, there were sovereign countries that were able to exert pressure against this, which was China. And then you had Russia as well. But China partners with Russia. It's really China. So now you can't, you have massive competition here, which is China. Now they effectively have to negotiate with transnational capital. And so if you look all around the world right now, you got China and Asia. You got the middle, which is the Gulf countries, Iran, Israel. And then you've got America, which is effectively Europe underneath it, and Canada and everything there. All of this block is effectively decided we'll put as much of that into the private American liquid stock markets. We'll laden everyone with debt, and we'll create energy dependencies so they become fully dependent. That's one strategy. How do you how do you control Europe? You destroy their energy supplies, and you acquire all of their assets, and you make them buy all your military. You have NATO, various other things, and you create a Western Hemisphere bloc. Now, the resistance here is China, but there's this place in the middle that you need to resolve. Now, historically, you created effectively, you co-opted this Zionist movement. People talk a lot about Zionism right now. Zionism is effectively um, capital that partnered with Western interest, whose job was to agitate war in the Middle East and create this forever war model. And so by having this, expansive, what's called a Greater Israel project, you use that, you have a religious narrative in order to agitate the region continually. You also have covert operations where you fund groups, ISIS, Al Qaeda, various other things, covertly in order to pretend it's a religious battle, but really you're just hiring them as CIA ops and Mossad ops and MI6 ops. At the same time, you need strategic tension. And so if you look at Iran's history, you basically had um, lots of MI6 ops, lots of CIA ops to take the oil of Iran and stop it being nationalized. So it was the British Empire came along, you have British Petroleum, they took 80% of the revenue and gave Iran 20% of the revenue. You then overthrew the democracy and you had operations like Ajax, where you would effectively create a color revolution. You would use media. You would put CIA and MI6 ops to kill people, and then you would blame it on the regime. Use sanctions and currency war in order to create an economic circumstance to uprise the people, and then you try and create a coup by aligning them with an alternative military, overthrow the government, install your dictator, and then that dictator acts as a Western puppet to make sure that the oil is continually flowing back to Europe and America and the Western Hemisphere. So that's the history. Now, in 79, you had a revolution. But where did that revolution come from? It was Khomeini, who was just this week taken out, assassinated, or in the last 11 days. I'm losing track of time. Before that, you had Hamanai, which is like a different one. I always get them confused. Very similar names. But he came from exile in France in 1979. And then you had this effectively Islamist, radicalized, they call it, and all the media painting it as a radical Islamist terrorist and all that type of stuff. But if you read things like the declassified CIA reports on Iran Contra was an operation that explains how this works. So the CIA was funding in Iraq Saddam Hussein, giving Saddam Hussein chemical weapons, trying to use the oil resources there. At the same time, America was giving money to Israel. Israel then was taking that money and purchasing weapons from the military industrial complex and selling them to Iran. So Israel, US, and Iran were all working together in the Iran Contra. Then Iran built a weapons smuggling network that was going back to Contras, which is like militia groups. You hire mercenaries in Nicaragua that were protecting the US drug trafficking routes, which is obviously done by the CIA. So everything you can see, you can look at what's happening in Mexico right now. You can look at what's happening in Iran. Look what's happening in Israel. Look what's happening in US, and you can see that operation never ended. And so what you had effectively is an Islamic Revolutionary Guard, IRGC, that came in. And immediately what happened after Iran Contra, Iraq and Iran went to war. And so you had this 8-day war, and America was funding both sides via the Iran Contra affair and via funding of the Saddam Hussein, which led to selling a bunch of weapons. So now you have effectively, you created a militarized economy with a narrative that this is about religion on the Islamic side. You have Israel with the narrative that it's about the Jewish faith and the Jewish religion. But really, they were an outpost for US military. They were funding groups like ISIS, Al Qaeda, And then Iran started funding resistance against that. And you built this resistance economy. And that was groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, and groups in Iraq, revolutionary side. And that was all after the wars. And so, what effectively happened, if you look around here, you had the Gulf countries that were propping up the petrodollar. You had Turkey that was partnering with NATO. You had Israel that was an outpost for the US military industrial complex. And you had Iran that was funding the resistance economy. And then when you sanction Iran, you create the economic environment whereby you have a government that is crippled and an IRGC that effectively is propping up their own military industrial complex. That's what's called strategic tension. And so once you have everyone fighting, you even create like fake narratives around like Syria. I don't want to get too complicated because there's no point. But you basically create sectarian division. You say, oh, you're the Shia Muslims, you're the Sunni Muslims. You take those religious ideological differences, you shake them up, and then you start funding militias and say, and you fund this, you fund an aspect of the Shia side, an aspect of the Sunni side. You confuse everything with these ISIS groups and Al Qaeda groups. And basically, you have strategic tension. This is why America ended up with $10 trillion of debt in the Middle East and the propping up of the petrodollar. And so, what happens now is based upon all this background. That was a long answer. Hopefully, I'm putting it all together. I hope it's clear. You can. You have all this strategic tension. The profit is all the debt ends up with the American people, all the profits end up in the stock market, and you can ensure that the Middle East is never able to unify around their vast resources. Africa's never allowed to unify. When Africa tried to unify and create their own currency, you take out Gaddafi, in Libya. And so, and when Saddam Hussein says, no, we're going to actually price things in euros, you take out Saddam Hussein. You just create a narrative. You just say it's nuclear weapons, it's weapons of mass destruction. So what you need is effectively a narrative for the people to deceive them into thinking something else is happening. You fuel religious tensions to make people think it's a religious battle. And then with that religious battle, you blow up their countries, and then you radicalize people where they think they're joining their religious battle. And so by having, Israel thinking they're in a state for their survival and everyone's trying to kill the Jews, you get the perfect way of recruiting the Jews to the IDF. And so what happens then, you have the IDF that grows, and then they do false flag operations all around the Middle East to take all the Jews that were in Iran, Iraq, and all the other places and force them to go to Israel, grow your population, grow your military industrial complex, make them all join the IDF, and then use that to fuel terrorism and militia, and then hide it all under the media, and then do other false flags, 9/11, various other things. So there you got like the entire history of the makeup. Now, what changed?
Yes.
Well, America needed oil and gas, but under the first Trump administration, they really harnessed fracking and became energy independent. And once they became energy independent, this whole flow of propping up the petrodollar started to get a little bit funky, because now America decided we want to be big oil exporters and gas exporters, to prop up the Ponzi scheme, and keep the debt going at the end of cycle. And so now America starts competing with the Middle East, and China grows. And what do the Gulf countries do? They say, we can't sell our oil to America, but we're selling it to China. And they start building all of this wealth because China grows and grows and grows and grows and takes more of America's GDP. So they're like, well, we're selling all of our energy to America. But after all of these wars, we ended up with this American base, and that American base isn't protecting us. It's just used in order to agitate the region. Whenever America wants to launch a war, they come and use our base. And so we're telling our people that this protects us. But it turns out that it's just using, US interests. And so slowly, China comes up with a de-dollarization plan. We have the Russia-Ukraine war. America confiscates and shows that treasuries are not a good way to store your central bank reserves. Europe takes a bunch of the money. And now we have this rising power. All of the Middle East are dependent. Who else is dependent? Iran's sanctioned. Russia's sanctioned. Who do they sell their oil to? Well, they sell it to China. Yep. And they sell it to India. And so BRICS forms, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And the Gulf countries are no longer dependent upon America. So what do they start doing? They say, well, we don't want to buy your debt. We don't want to buy those treasuries anymore. We're going to buy your equities. And so the Gulf sovereign wealth funds start buying the creme de la creme of American equities. And so rather than buying, the debt, they buy the shares. And so now what happens with shares? Well, suddenly, if America's controlled by corporate interest and you're one of the largest shareholders with the financial industrial complex, you're now BlackRock's partner. You're now State Street's partner, Vanguard's partner, Goldman Sachs's partner, JP Morgan's partner. Those were the people that used to try and kill your country and make sure that they could steal your resources. But now they want your money. And so when they need your money, you now are able to exert influence over the private sector that controls America. And so the Gulf sovereign wealth funds were taking Chinese money, selling their oil and resources, building a sovereign wealth fund, and buying all of America's equities. And they were no longer lending it to the US government. So the US government is not getting its debt. It's getting a lot of its military funding from the Pentagon. That's going up and up and up and up and up. That's pushing up the price of stocks. And the Gulf sovereign wealth funds are the investors in those stocks. So now the world order is completely changed. Now China gets to exert influence over Iran, over Saudi Arabia, over the Gulf countries, over Russia, because the sanctions push them to push Iran and Russia to China. And so now they had no choice but to sell their oil to Russia, to China. And China then says, well, if you want me to buy your oil, I'll keep buying your oil. But now they become economic dependencies upon China purchasing that oil. And so China has more leverage. Now you've got the whole Gulf, every country across Asia, virtually all of the world. And it turns out that when America hollowed out its base, its manufacturing base, it can no longer manufacture weapons without China. And so F-35 fighter jets, like drones, everything needs China's rare earth minerals, their commodities, and their manufacturing. So now the American military is dependent upon China. Europe is dependent upon China. The Gulf countries are dependent upon China. Iran's dependent upon China. Russia's dependent upon China. The whole world is dependent upon this manufacturing base that is effectively exporting all around the world. Now, it's only with that backdrop that you can really figure out what's going on here. Because if you think this is about, religion, if you think this is about a nuclear program for the last 40 years we've been told is 2 weeks away, this is about energy. And it's always been about energy. Because whoever controls the energy and the flow of that energy, i.e. the ports, controls power in their region, in their hemisphere. And so that's kind of like the entire backdrop to help you analyze and understand this. Now, what comes next? I mean, I'll take a quick pause there and then we'll go deep into the real Iran war. Did you have any questions on any of that? Or?
Do I have any questions? Yes, I've got a sheet covered in them. Let me see if I can outline this a little bit. So, to see if I'm kind of getting this clear view of the situation, which does make sense to me as well, is that largely the operation is driven by trying to cut off energy flows into China because that's putting them in too much of a powerful position. Is the goal to redirect the energy somewhere else, or is it more or less like, no, we're just looking to cut it off? And would that also explain, because I'm not mistaken, Venezuela was also shipping energy to China as well. So does that also explain the reason for the Venezuelan operation beforehand, which meant they were probably already looking to do this in the coming months after the fact?
Yeah, here's the really interesting thing. I'm sure you've been consuming all the news, watching a bunch of podcasts, listening to the trad media, listening to alternative media. The one thing you'll notice is nobody's got an agreed upon reason for this war.
Right?
No one can actually come up with a reason. Like everyone's got theories, but no, there's so much divergence in terms of what people think's happening here. Some people think it's about taking out an evil regime. Other people think it's about choking off China. Other people think it's about protecting Israel and Israel rules the world and they're forcing America to do it. Other people think that you've got to take out the threat of a nuclear program, and all of those narratives are used for whichever one like suits your ideology or your algorithm. Um, where the way that I see this is that firstly, who can is America a sovereign state? Well, I said that it's controlled by the financial industrial complex,
Right.
and the financial industrial complex is transnational capital.
Correct.
So when you understand that, you realize there's no such thing as America first,
Yeah.
because Trump works for his lobby, and his lobby is big tech, big military, and big financial. And so he works for them. Now he has to make you think that this is MAGA or America first, but he works for his lobbies. That's who pays the bill, and they all have terms and conditions when they funded him. So there is no such thing as America in that sense.
Let me jump in for
There
one
is,
second because this is where
yeah,
I'm getting stuck too. So, thinking about the transnational, like the financial industrial complex, the part that I'm missing is I would view this as actually hurting the flows into U.S. equities that they own, and that this would actually impact the market in a negative way. So I'm trying to figure out, I guess again, they want to have maybe control over the actual resources themselves. I'm trying to figure out why they're basically how this benefits them in the end if it's going to in the short term impact the assets that they hold.
yeah. So if you're transnational capital, you need an event that redirects capital flows and energy flows all around the world. You're watching that event right now.
Yeah.
If you wanted the Strait of Hormuz to be closed, then you would do everything that has just happened.
Yep.
Transnational capital would create a narrative via Israel, a narrative via Iran, and then you would use the US military and the Israeli military and the Iranian military, and you would come up with something like what we're seeing right now. And so, what is actually happening right now? Well, let's take a zoom out. So we had basically a confusing narrative. Originally, it was about a nuclear program. We had the 12-day war prior, which led to essentially decapitation campaigns on hardline IRGC members in Iran. We had severe economic stress for Israel when it got hit. Mossad targets were taken out, various other targets were taken out, the ports were closed, tourism's dead, exports are down. They've stopped exporting their liquefied natural gas to Egypt and Jordan. So now they've got revenue is down. The stock market's doing very well because it's a militarized stock market, but the debt is being burdened. Same thing as America, right? You're
Yep.
increasing the debt. You're taking out strategic industries and you're vassalizing a nationalized country into private corporate interest. That's what was happening. That was effectively happening at the Israel level. Now, at the Iran level, you had the decapitation campaign, and you had the quote unquote taking out of the nuclear program, and a narrative to off ramp because IRGC has a very, very strong military ballistic missile program and various other things. It's made out like it's just nothing, but they've got very advanced technology, cybersecurity, ballistic missiles that there's no solution for. It's an efficient military. It's not
Yeah.
America,
They've got hypersonic
but it's
missiles as far as I know.
correct. Yeah, hypersonic missiles. I'm no military expert, so sorry if I get those wrong. I've been learning on the move, more financial. But I listen to experts that help me figure out that stuff. Um, and so yeah, so effectively, if you're the Gulf countries, you're in the now. You've got these U.S. military bases. You've got Israel that's an agitator, and you've got Iran that is also an agitator through the IRGC. What do you want as the Gulf countries as transnational capital? Well, you want all of this shit out of your region. You want Israel to stop agitating and Greater Israel project and making the justification for war. You want IRGC to dismantle hardliners that are not on board with a regional stability plan, that effectively have a narrative, but they profit from the IRGC has its own economy that's separate to the Iranian economy. They control banking, they control military, they control various other resources, and a lot of the weapons trafficking routes that allow for the resistance economy. Now, they fund these resistance groups because it gives them leverage when they're trying to negotiate and get sanctions removed. And so you as a Gulf country that wants regional stability and want investment and want, you want decolonization. You want the US bases out. You want Israel to stop agitating wars. You want IRGC to normalize with the Gulf countries. And you want the resistance, militia groups and the resistance economy out, all of them, and the American proxies as well. So you've got ISIS, Al Qaeda, Hezbollah, all that stuff. Hezbollah is on the Iran side. America has ISIS, Al Qaeda, and Israel. And then you have the different groups that come from representing Turkey interest or Saudi interest or other factions that want to be that had their different version of a relationship. So what's a great way of getting all of them out? Well, one thing you can do is get as much influence over American financial powers. So the CEO of Saudi Aramco allows for an IPO of 2% of its oil. Saudi allows for 2% of its oil company to go public, Saudi Aramco, then gets a board seat on BlackRock and is now able to influence BlackRock. Then all of the deals is co-investment. All of the AI infrastructure, all of these data centers, X, all of this technology, OpenAI, all this stuff, ChatGPT, all of it is co-invested with the Gulf Sovereign Wealth Funds. And so the Gulf Sovereign Wealth Fund is putting up the capital. BlackRock is pulling together everyone's pensions and American people. And so they're able to now, as transnational capital, exert influence over military and military strategy. So what I think is happening here right now is that they needed to co-opt Trump. So how did the Gulf countries co-opt? Everyone thinks they just think of Israel, APAC, all of these things. But what, APAC gets from American Jewish billionaires and Christian billionaires that are subscribed to the evangelical ideology, they fund APAC. And because it's funded by Americans, they're able to use it as a lobby without being classified as a foreign interest.
Yep.
Even though all of those people are aligned with Israel. And so you have that confusing thing. Well, Qatar can't do that. Yep. Saudi can't do that. So what do? Well, they set up funds and feeder funds. And one of them they set up was called Affinity Partners. And it's got $5 billion of Gulf Sovereign Wealth Fund money. And it's managed by Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And so Trump wants a Trump Tower in Gaza. He wants a Trump Tower in Saudi. He wants a Trump Tower. So all of a sudden, after this, you get BlackRock setting up their office in Saudi. You get these financial institutions. Saudi starts opening up its financial markets and its stock market. It suddenly starts doing bonds with China, Chinese investment banks. And suddenly you're getting capital that's flowing over here as a result of that. And then Trump comes into presidency, and Trump has a $5 billion fund that smashes any type of APAC funding, anything that the Israel lobby can produce that relies upon regional stability. So effectively, the Gulf countries, I think, set up a plan in order to acquire Israel via UAE, normalize with Israel, make UAE look like a car, like look someone that's subordinate to Zionists. They get the reputational damage. You start doing good cop, bad cop. You settle all the regions like Yemen and Somalia and Sudan and Libya. You decide who's going to control all the ports. They split it up between Qatar, UAE, all these different people. You get BlackRock to effectively get as many of the deals over to you. You acquire it, you do reverse IMF, reverse colonization. And then what do? Well, you say to the US military, while everyone's talking and thinking it's Israel that controls the world, can you go and get rid of all Iran's militias and take out IRGC hardliners? Okay.
Interesting.
And so what does America do? America has a narrative. Israel controls the world. Releases Epstein files.
Yep.
Has a narrative where Americans now all hate Israel. They're asking questions about. They're saying Israel rules the world. They're saying Trump works for Netanyahu. You allow that narrative to persist. You buy Trump, and then you get Trump to basically on his last, where he's got nothing to lose, give him his family legacy, investments that are going to be profiting from regional stability in the Middle East, and you get them to take out the factions of your enemy, and then you normalize with the other factions. Here's what's really important. Here's a bit that they think of Iran as a monolith. Is America a monolith? Is Canada a monolith? No, you have a bunch of people that are very different, and Iran is, very, very different views on politics. And you have, very different types of people in Iran. Now, think of it in simplest terms as two factions of power. Let's call it the pragmatic reformers. You had a helicopter go down, and suddenly we get a reformer prime minister in Iran. You have the 12-day war, and suddenly a bunch of hardliners are taken out in the IRGC. Then you have continual negotiations, but you keep saying negotiation off, negotiation on, negotiation off, negotiation on. Then you have the operation where Scott Bessent did a currency war to destroy the Iranian currency.
Yep.
And then you put Mossad in order to create the uprising.
Yep, the riots.
And then you create the media attention you destroy the savings of the Iranian people after years and years of sanction. You create an inflationary cycle. If you look at Lindsey Graham, they were all saying Mossad's there, and Scott Bessent said he did the currency operation. You destroy everyone's savings. You create a narrative that there's about to be, a government, a revolutionary uprising. You create a cartoon character that the Shah's son that they're saying he's going to take over. He's just a cartoon character. He's never going to take over. And then you effectively get people to come up against the IRGC. And then you start arresting a bunch of the IRGC members from within the IRGC. So that's the bit the media doesn't tell you. Yep. You take out the ones that are on board the plan. And then when that doesn't work, that doesn't eliminate. So you've had all these different attempts to try and get it to the version of the IRGC and government that is wanted by transnational capital. Then you do the final one. You do the big war. And in the big war, you get the US military to take out certain people. You get Israel to take out, at the same time, to take out Hezbollah, which is, some of the militias which we're witnessing right now. by the way, this is a story that everyone will hate because
I know it.
here's the thing. Everyone's going to hate it. It's when you explain, because everyone's got these emotions of thinking that something else is happening here and it means so much and so many people died. Like, this is how the system is. This is how evil the system is. And so you've got these two cartoon characters, right? In America, they're like, you've got this evil Islamist terrorist that's the center of terrorism. You've got to cut off the snake. You know, they want to kill us, they want to bomb us, they want to nuke us. Death to America, death to Israel. That's one version. That's the faction of the IRGC in Iran Contra affair that were aligned with Israel and American military industrial complex. They want chaos. They want the region to be forever in war so that military companies can profit from war. And again, it's done through plausible deniability and higher levels and compartmentalization. It's never going to be as simple as I'm explaining. That's the part that is aligned with military. Forever war, create chaos, war forever. And you need both Israel and the higher levels of the IRGC and the death to America narrative in order to keep the wartime economy alive. And within here, there are people whose power and wealth in a mafia group, when there's sanctions, there's also a mafia. They want to preserve the status quo. They would never be on board a plan to move to regional stability because they would give up their power.
Yep.
You know, with factions of power. And so when you say Iran wants, there's no such thing. That you've just got factions of power that have self-interest. And then you've got a lot of people that are genuinely on a religious mission, anti-imperialist. But they're painted into another cartoon. The other cartoon is this is the last holy people, the last fighters and defenders that are taking on imperialism and the defenders of the Palestinian cause. Now, that narrative is useful to recruit the people that you need in your army. But at the top, there's war profiteering as well, you know, and people don't know what they're working for or who they're working for. So you have these two extreme cartoons, and they have a completely different version. And then you have the people that hate Iran that used to live there, that made loads of money under the Shah, and they moved to America once the Islamic Revolution happened. And obviously, they hate the IRGC because they liked Iran how it was before this. And the sanctions came from that. And so when you create severe economic pressure to try and overthrow your government, and then they're brought up in America and Britain and Canada, they're just going to see the Western narrative of what the IRGC is. And whenever you have these covert operations, you just see a brutal, radicalized, and all that stuff. But then they benefit. So you have all of these different things put together. Now, what changed? And this is just the linchpin that I think plugs it all together. Economic sanctions destroyed the economy. You had, you know, we'll have a nuclear deal. Then Trump ripped it up. Then they start negotiating again. All that stuff. Now, there's proven that they all sit around the table and negotiate. That happens. You know, there was diplomacy, and then every time they got to a deal, Israel would either do a preemptive strike, and this time America did a preemptive strike. Because on Friday, before this war started, Amman said Iran has agreed to term, and Amman was the mediator.
Yeah, that was in Geneva.
Agreed to zero nuclear enrichment, and you know, a framework where the enriched uranium would go to Russia and China would provide security guarantees. Then we had the framework for what would happen with Gaza, which is the border peace thing. I won't go too deep into that, but effectively the next step is to have a coalition of Arab security take over Israel's illegal occupation. And at that stage, Israel did everything to stop that happening, because these are the military arm. They don't want peace,
yep.
Right? But China wants peace. China wants an Iran that wants to do business, a Saudi that wants to do business. It will tolerate Israel, but it definitely doesn't want an Israel that's an agent of U.S. military corruption and power. You know, so it wants a tame Israel. It wants Gulf countries that want to do business, and it wants an Iran that wants to open up markets to regional stability. And so China put together a plan. And that plan was it's been executed for the last 5 years, normalized between Iran and Saudi Arabia, back the Gulf Cooperation Council with BRICS, and make sure that Iran has everything it needs from both Russia and China so that it's able to effectively, strategically destroy Israel and take out all the US military bases. So now you got the game set up. Okay. What are the two things? What are the two weapons that you can fire? A financial one and a military one. So now you've got a game between the factions of power. Let me set this up as well. So we are not in a war between Iran, Israel, and America. We are in a war between the military industrial complex and the factions aligned with the military industrial complex that profit from it, and the financial industrial complex that are aligned with Gulf countries and China and American financial powers that now want the build back better phase. They're done with the war. Now they want the build back better phase, and they want the military to go somewhere else. Okay. So they don't lose their military. They want the forever war somewhere else. But the military, because Saudi and the Gulf countries are now exerting their influence. So let me tell you who's actually in the war. You got the US military industrial complex. You got hardliner factions of the IRGC that are maintaining their power from war. You've got Israel and the Zionist ideology. You've got the neocons in America that are owned by the APAC and US lobby, um, and that's the military industrial complex. One side of the war. The other side of the war, you got the financial industrial complex that wants regional stability. You got the Gulf sovereign wealth funds. You got the reformist pragmatists within Iran, i.e., the Iranian government, and you got people within IRGC that recognize that this is an existential threat. And so they're on board with the more hardliner elements of the IRGC. So it requires change with these elements. And you still have the IRGC. You make the world think it's regime change, because if you have regime change, you'll have an uprising. You'll turn Iran into Syria with 90 million people. You'll create a vacuum. You'll create carnage. That's the military model. This is the financial industrial complex, and they're aligned with China and BRICS. So you've got the GCC, you've got BRICS, you've got factions within Iran, and they have to turn part of the regime change that will happen in Israel as well, which will be a GCC aligned rather than America aligned, less radicalized, puppet government, just like you have in Syria right now. He used to be head of ISIS, but now he works for Turkey in the GCC. He has a job, and his job is to get regional stability in line with the regional powers. And if he fails, you just take him out and call him a terrorist. If he succeeds, then you need a successor. So the real battle is Mick versus Fick. It's not Iran versus Israel versus America. When you follow the money, that's what it's saying. Now, okay, so you won, and I believe Fick will win.
Yep.
There's more power there, but you got to de-radicalize all these mix. You got the radical Zionists, the evangelical Christian neocons in America. You got to take out those IRGC hardliners, and you got to reform Israel. So you defund Israel eventually, so it's not being funded by a military. You get Tucker Carlson, Candace Owen, and all these people to de-radicalize the evangelical Christians in America. These are connected to high levels of CIA operatives. And then you strategically weaken Israel, strategically weaken Iran, and now you just got to get the US military bases out. And so that faction, I believe, is coordinating the next stage of the theater. The negotiations haven't stopped. Part of the negotiations that led to this battle was that they said, start the war, and we'll know who the people that derail the plan are. Some of them might kill children in a school in Iran, and 165 6 to 12-year-old children were killed, and they're investigating it right now. My guess is that's an Israel operation.
Yep.
America's deciding whether they're going to cover up for it. But when you find out who's going off plan, those are the people that need to be regime changed and eliminated. Okay. So every time someone goes really too far, like blowing up water plants that would
Yep.
effectively, those are the people that are going to be eliminated, until the last people standing are the ones that were sat around the negotiation table. You'll notice how everyone that was negotiating is still alive today. That's what you'll notice. And I reckon they stay alive till the end. And there are people from IRGC, people from the Iranian government, and they'll stay.
Well, I'm trying to see like how this plays out, and I'm trying to take it all in as fast as I can, and then try to make sense of it for myself, make sure I'm following everything along. Because what like appears to me is like, okay, so if we take out the hardliners in Iran, it would also, I think, weaken Iran at that point in time as well too. At the same time, is also weakening and then also kind of appeasing Israel, because you can't have Iran then as a threat for the reason why they're built up. It's like you've got a weaker and appeased Israel. You've got a weaker Iran. You're going to get more stability in that region. At the same time, I'm thinking about from the financial industrial complex in terms of like stock market flows as well. It's like, okay, we're going to weaponize, rent the US military to go in and do this operation. We're going to have increased fiscal spending as a result of it. We've also got, what is it, Kevin Warsh coming in May, who was a bit of a hawk beforehand, which would give him the credibility to go ahead and print like crazy, essentially, to finance this operation. Yeah, it also would explain why China and Russia are not getting directly involved. They have no interest in keeping, I think, the current Iranian regime propped up. There's no threat of World War III here. They're going in and basically trying to clean house so they can actually make, which is a very, inhumane way of saying it. But they're going in to clean house so they can get stability in the region and then actually profit from it, selling the resources to the rest of the world.
Yeah, so let's there's a bit more layer on top of there.
Oh, good.
It's so layered, it's so confusing. But I hope it's as clear as I can make it.
Okay.
And thanks for summarizing it as well. So the biggest trade at the end of this is two things. Regional stability in the Middle East changes the entire world forever.
Right.
If the financial industrial complex can engineer a scenario where they get a bit of control over the Strait of Hormuz, then that helps them in the multipolar world.
Yeah.
If you can also get a bit of India, that helps them in the multipolar world. If you can get a bit of UAE, that helps them in the multipolar world. So you've got these factions where the financial industrial complex is hedging for the new world order. And they have their leverage points. India is one of those leverage points into BRICS. UAE is one of the leverage points into the GCC. These are all co-opted financial, and so you've got those different factions. Now, if at the end of this you get a bit of control of the Strait of Hormuz, then that's really, really important for the financial industrial complex to use the falling US empire to get as much power as it can. So now it is using America to get everything it possibly can: Venezuelan oil, Strait of Hormuz access routes, and partnership with its strategic points, take over, and get as much power out of the Israel vacuum, and also open up Iran. And so what do you have at the end of the big trade at the end of this is regional stability in the Middle East. That's nothing would produce higher returns than that. And again, you needed to apologize. I also need to apologize. I'm putting on my analytical hat here. If you want me to put my humanitarian hat on, I'd be speaking very differently.
Yep.
I believe it's absolute crimes against humanity. But I have to put one hat on because I can't be a normal human and analyze rationally, because they're completely the opposite. Geopolitics is the opposite of human emotion.
Yeah.
Like, you can be friends and enemies, and you can do the most inhumane things, and you can be forced to do things that no human would ever do on their own because of the reality of survival of your country.
Yeah.
Okay. So me speaking like this is not me being human. This is me taking my human hat off and analyzing in reality, because the human hat will get this completely wrong. I'll pick a side, I'll look for a sport, I'll look for my team, and I'll start cheering them on, and I'll start making enemies with my fellow humans because we think differently, and then divide and conquer. So I'm trying to get out of that. Right. So the analysis, you got that. What else is the biggest financial weapon of mass destruction that you could fire? Take the Strait of Hormuz, the 20% of LNG, fertilizers, massive resources, shut it. And who's going to benefit from that?
Wouldn't the
Well,
US
there's
and
two
Russia
beneficiaries, US and Russia.
at the
So
detriment of Europe, correct?
Russia has just got, in order to get oil relief, you pump the price of oil right up. Now the American oil producers, they get to profiteer. The military get their swan song in the Middle East before they move into actual defense mode rather than attack forever war mode. They get to drain the munitions of Iran and Israel, potentially, depending on how that goes. And you get Iran to blow up the US military bases. And so now the Gulfs are free from their US military bases. And Iran is just blowing up US military bases. And it's going after, and it's destroying US's position in the Middle East. And that's what they're negotiating. They're saying anybody that wants access to the Strait of Hormuz, take out your US envoy or your US, whatever it's called. What's the word I'm looking for? When you have a country within a country, a building.
Oh, geez. Embassy. There we go.
Sorry, I'm losing my head. I've been up so long, like on this 24/7 commentary on this shit. Take out your US embassy, and then your Israeli embassy, and then you can get access to the Strait of Hormuz. China, you can have access. Everyone else, no, you ain't getting access. Come to the table, negotiate. Russia comes along and says, hey, anybody need any oil? Anyone need any gas? Guess what? We can get oil and gas pretty much anywhere. And so everyone is running over to Russia. America is saying, hey, that Nord Stream pipeline that we blew up that meant that Germany doesn't have access to your gas? Well, now we're going to shut Qatar down because you hedged from Russia to Qatar. And now you're back to America.
Yep.
We're gonna set terms. You get a price crisis. You get a recession. We're gonna tell you how much LNG you're gonna buy from us, and you can buy some from our friends at the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. So America is now a ginormous liquefied natural gas energy exporter, and the Western Hemisphere is under the control of America.
Yep.
Russia is saying, I ain't going to help the Europeans. They've sanctioned us. China, India, you need some stuff? Yeah, we'll get it over to you. And so Asia is now getting relief by renegotiating with Russia. So now you've turned, what happened to the Gulf countries? Tourism down, shut down all the airports, take out their US bases. People are starting to wonder, the real estate's crashing. You're taking a temporary hit. But now, what used to be called the Middle East is returning to what it used to be. It used to be called West Asia. The only reason it was called the Middle East is because London colonized it, France colonized it, and you were looking east and they considered it the middle. Prior to that, it was called West Asia. So you have turned the GCC into BRICS, into China, and you have now got a full-blown multipolar world. You've rebuilt West Asia, and you've put Europe under the dependency of the Western Hemisphere via American private interest. So the financial industrial complex has now got the sovereign wealth funds. It owns the West. It's vassalized Europe. It partners with China, and it's got its infiltration operations in both BRICS and the GCC to try and remain relevant in a multipolar world. Its assets under administration is going up and up and up. The people are going further and further and further into debt. The currency is being weakened, but what happened as soon as the war kicked off, Bitcoin turned around, the dollar started strengthening again.
I was going to say, wouldn't this also
Markets,
prop up treasury demand for a while as well too by having just increased global chaos? That's another way to just buy yourself more time to get more assets using those dollars.
yeah, and you have oil going through the roof, which
Yep.
creates an inflationary cycle, which creates the narrative for how to get this over quickly and to apply exertion. You know how to apply negotiation pressure. So China effectively controls the price of oil. They knew this was going to happen. They built 1.2 billion barrels ahead of this. They
Wow.
partnered with Russia. They've got the rare earth minerals. America, once they lose all their munitions and military, they can't rebuild without China.
Yep.
They've got the rare earth minerals. They've got the components. So effectively, what's coming up in April? A meeting called the China Summit, where Trump is going to meet with Xi Jinping. I expect that that's going to change the world in April.
Wow.
So we've had this long operation. You had, Trump was involved in it all in term one and term two. You had Abraham Accords, you had the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, you had Biden in the middle, then you had October the 7th, then you had Israel had to ethnically cleanse and genocide the Palestinians. Egypt wouldn't let it happen. They held their border despite being bribed by America. IMF said, if you take them in, we'll give you your $18 billion debt pardoning. China said, don't worry, don't take it, hold strong. They then normalized between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The Gulf Cooperation Council started resolving their issues. They said, you take charge of Libya, we'll take charge of Yemen, we'll get this port. You, UAE, you go normalize with Israel. You're going to look like you're subordinate Zionist. You're going to get the reputational damage. Saudi's going to look like the good person. Qatar, you get Europe. You go invest in Europe. Make an LNG dependency. Make sure that they can normalize with Palestine. You had all of these different events that, when you understand it from this remit, this was the global reset into a multipolar world order. And eventually, you will have an Iran that is on board with China's vision, that's normalized with the Gulf Cooperation Council, and an Israel that, in theory, if this mission works, and I'm not saying it's simple, this is probably the hardest mission. You've got rid of all the proxies, and all the states have stopped funding militias. Iran has not been funding any of their militias. And then you've got these operations where, unless you have a state sponsor, your militias are no longer going to, they need to either integrate or be eliminated. So this is a very complex operation. A lot can go wrong. But I believe that at the end of this, you get peace in the Middle East for real.
Yep.
And of course, there are people that are trying to sabotage this plan.
Yep.
And that's when you've got, and the hardest part is Israel. Obviously the hardest part is Israel. They build their whole economy out of being an agitator and profiteering from war. But in the end, you had the border peace set up, which has got nothing to do, it has got to do with peace, but Trump gets to take credit for what China's negotiated. That's what's happening. China's done it. Trump gets to take credit, and he gets to get rich by facilitating this happening. Who's funding the border peace? The Gulf countries. So the Gulf countries are going to own Palestine.
Yep.
The Gulf countries are going to buy as much of Israel as they can. All of those is illegal settlements that Trump's profiteering from via affinity capital. You've got Trump that can try and deliver it for the Gulf countries. You've got the Gulf countries that are doing this aligned with China, and that faction of power is kicking ass. But they had to negotiate with the military, say, give us our swan song war, allow us to show our brochures and power, let us get the Pentagon budget up from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion, and make sure you give us Europe. We want war in Europe. We want war in Central and South America. And we also want some strategic tension over the Asia Pacific region. But China would have said, nah, Taiwan's ours.
Yeah.
Russia would have said, Ukraine's ours. And America would have said, the Western Hemisphere is ours. We got Europe and we got Central and South America. You split it all up. And now what do you need to make that transition without causing, you need a three-way off ramp. You need IRGC to look incredibly strong. We took out the US military bases. We took out Israel. Israel will never be the same again. Right. But we lost Khamenei. He's a martyr. We had all of these martyrs. Now it's time because China's telling us we need to get our act in gear and they're buying all of our oil. And so China will be the diplomat, is my forecast and prediction. Uh, and and then Israel needs its off ramp. They say we took out the eye of the snake, all the militias. We've tamed Hezbollah, we tamed Hamas, we've done this. You know, Netanyahu gets regime change. We're starting to see assassinations from Smotrich, Gavir's family, Netanyahu's brother. Allegedly, I'm not sure if these things are true. This is all the fog of war information right now, but we're starting to see things like that. He's probably negotiated his exit so he doesn't go to prison for his crimes. He probably ends up in Argentina with Milei or Hungary with Olsen or whoever. He's negotiated his exit. He's trying to be as useful to power. Say, get as much land as you can, and that will give us more leverage when we're doing the negotiation. So he's doing that. Meanwhile, the algorithms will destroy Israel's reputation, expose they've been in control and all the lobby and all the APAC and all the crimes and all the shit. Where meanwhile it was a jurisdiction for the mafia, for a mafia to get away with their crimes for testing the most sickest technology, military technology.
Yep.
Um, and then they get a reformist, leftist, exposed October the 7th. That was Netanyahu. It wasn't us. GCC aligned, China aligned. And effectively, the Middle East belongs to Asia now. It's no longer America's territory. But the financial industrial complex wants as many choke points in there. Maybe it gets Summer Strait of Hormuz. Maybe BlackRock gets a bunch of assets there. BlackRock will get their, BlackRock portfolio companies will get all their defense contracts. And then we focus on what everyone really wants right now: AI data centers powered by nuclear energy to create a police and surveillance state and a global central bank digital currency while there's a multipolar world. So I think this is the global reset. I think it's a managed transition.
Yep.
And Israel gets its narrative. Oh, of course, America needs to say, we're strong. We're the strongest military in the world. We took out the nuclear program. And guess what? You all thought that this was going to be a forever war. I told you I'm the president. I'm the president of peace. I go there, strength. I get shit done, and then I leave, and you're not in a war. All of those neocon warmongers, look at them. They're the ones that did it. You lost faith in me. But I'm the guy that gets shit done. And you thought we were going into a long extended war. And then I think this is my prediction. And again, things can go wrong.
Yep.
That this is my best thinking that I can come up with. I think in the April China summit, whatever has been negotiated will be what's announced. And that will be the world order and everyone looking strong. But America has to look strong while it shrinks.
Yep.
Because the financial industrial complex still wants to host the most liquid capital markets. They want to dump as much debt as possible. And they want to, use the US stock market so that they can manage ETF flows into foreign countries. And so this war strengthened the dollar. What will happen as soon as this ends? Oil will crash and we'll get back to where we were. Weakening of the dollar, yep. Weakening of the petrodollar, weakening of the euro dollar, weakening of the Japan carry trade, pushing east. A slow managed decline of the dollar, which means foreign stock markets after this. So at the moment, the American stock market is least affected relative to foreign stock markets, and the dollar is strengthening relative to other currencies.
Yep.
Once the war ends and oil spiked, oil will strengthen the dollar. Oil crashes at the end. And then the foreign stock markets start outperforming the US stock markets. and the foreign currencies outperform the US currencies. Commodities continue to perform, is my estimation, but they don't want to kill the dollar. They just want to continue for as long as they can until the last bond is sold and they've dumped the low interest rate bonds on the American pensioners. And so the Cayman Island hedgies, they're all rolling over the debt right now, profiteering from the debt. All the other countries are selling their debt. Effectively, what's Trump going to do? We're going to take on the Fed. We're gonna take on the Fed. We're gonna do fiscal dominance. We're gonna unify fiscal and monetary policy, which means print a shit ton of money.
End of the credit cycle.
And then we're gonna reform pensions and regime change the Fed. You get interest rates down, and then the pensioners will take on the debt at the subsidized low interest rate. And so they'll just roll it over with short-term treasuries, dump it on the pensioners, while the financial industrial complex profits from transitioning the world to a multipolar world order. Unemployment continues to go down. Birth rates continue to be absolutely atrocious, except in Africa. And you need AI and robotics in order to create a police and surveillance state.
Holy crap. All right. Simon, I think that is a wonderful place to put a pin in it with that prediction coming for April. You and I actually have a few things coming up here. We got more stuff planned in the coming weeks, but I think we're going to have to get back together after this April Chinese summit to see how it aligns with what you're currently thinking. And I got to say, like, ultimately, it makes a lot of sense to me from what we've seen previously and the path that you've laid out here. I'm blown away, sir. I'm blown away. Tell everybody where they can go to check out your stuff. Is there anything else that you want to leave them with that you think is something to make sure the takeaway to watch for? What should Bitcoiners be thinking about in the coming days and weeks?
You can't buy Bitcoin into weakness. I don't know whether this is, look, it's kind of like an AI NASDAQ, it's an AI tech play at the moment. That's what it's doing. But eventually, with all this manipulation, with all what we're seeing with Jane Street, with all what we're seeing with this derivatives complex, this ends in a self-custody play. There's not enough gold for those paper gold contracts. There's not enough silver for those paper silver contracts. There's not enough Bitcoin for those paper Bitcoin contracts. Strategy will suck it up, or you suck it up, and make sure you put it in self-custody. Enjoy the weakness. If we get lower and lower Bitcoin, just own more Bitcoin every day, every week, or every month, whatever's right for you. Enjoy it. You've got to have a long-term play here. If you're trying to trade this, you will get wrecked. You're not an insider. You don't know where this is going to go. You can't have enough real commodities. This is a self-custody play. We'll cover it another time, but BlackRock, their funds are starting to blow up.
Yeah, the private credit.
Some of those private credit is an AI trade. We'll probably get more weakness here. But so far, forget about the price. Your job is to get as much Bitcoin as possible over the next 10 years. I'm pretty sure you're going to be fine, because this 100% ends in a self-custody play. That's the real play at the end of this. And the only way you fight against the technocratic Orwellian surveillance state nightmare is that proof of weapons network. The resistance is proof of work. So yeah, I'm on X and I give real-time updates. I'm on Spaces if you want to ask questions. I still going live every week on YouTube. And then simondixon.com. I take these crazy long monoliths that I can't help but do. And I put them into like 10-minute AI summaries, and they take my 1 hour and summarize it pretty well. So I put all of that on my blog on simondixon.com.
Beautiful. I love it. And I can vouch for that. They do summarize it pretty well.
When I first got into Bitcoin, I was overwhelmed. The jargon, the security risks, the fear that one mistake could cost everything.